본격적으로 토론에 들어가기 앞서 최근에 국제사회가 얼마나 북한 인권 문제를 심각하게 생각하고 있는지 그 정도를 잘 알려줄 수 있는 북한 인권 조사위원회, 유엔 인권이사회에서 설립한 기관인데 그 기관의 활동에 대해서 또 최근에 발표한 그 기관의 그 보고서의 내용에 대해서 간략하게 소개를 드리도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 약 1년 전 작년 3월 달에 유엔 인권이사회에서 무투표로 설립이 결정이 되었습니다. 임기는 1년이고요. 최근에 결정된 바에 의하면 더 이상 그 임기 연장은 하지 않기로 되었습니다. 가장 기본적인 그 위임사항은 북한 내에서 벌어지고 있는 체계적이고 광범위하고 심각한 인권 침해 사안에 대해서 조사하는 것입니다. 그리고 구체적으로는 이 유엔 인권 COI가 설립되기 직전에 북한 인권 특별보고관이 제안한 9가지의 특별한 그 북한 인권 침해 유형에 대해서 조사하도록 위임을 받았습니다. 사례대로 보시면 신장권, 정치범수용소, 관리소라고 북한에서 얘기하는 정치범수용소, 고문 및 기타 비인도적 처우, 그리고 자의적 구금, 조직적인 차별, 그다음에 표현의 자유, 생명권, 이동의 자유, 그리고 강제 실종 내지 납치와 관련된 내용입니다. 여기서 기존의 COI 활동과 비교해봤을 때 북한 인권에 대해서 COI가 설립된 가장 중요한 특징은 기존의 리비아나 코트디부아르나 시리아와 관련해서 COI가 설립이 됐는데 그때는 다 암드 컨플릭트, 무력 충돌과 관련된 인권 침해 사안에 대해서 조사위원회가 설립됐지만 북한의 경우는 특별하게 무력 충돌도 벌어지지 않는 상황에 대해서 유엔에서 어떤 시간과 인력과 자원을 투자를 해서 설립을 했다는데 그 사실에서부터 이 국제사회가 북한 인권 문제를 어떻게 바라보고 있는지를 저희가 알 수 있습니다. 기존에도 유엔 내에서는 북한 인권을 다루기 위한 메커니즘들이 존재했었습니다. 가장 대표적인 것이 북한 인권 특별보고관인데 이번 COI 설립이 기존의 메커니즘과 가장 다른 점은 일단 단순한 인권 모니터링을 넘어서서 책임의 문제, 구체적으로는 어떤 형사 처벌의 문제를 검토하기로 했다는 점입니다. 특히 평시에도 적용될 수 있는 국제 문제 중에서도 인도에 관한된 Crimes Against Humanity에 대해서 검토하는 것이 위임사항 중에 하나였습니다. 또한 한 명의 특별보고관이었던 것을 3명의 조사위원과 20여 명의 유엔 최고인권대표사무소 직원들의 지원
supported the activities of the three commissioners.
또한 북한의 거부로
DPRK did not allow, of course, site visits. However, to overcome such limitations, the commissioners had public hearings and also one-on-one meetings with many of the victims and North Korean defectors, and they also put in efforts to enhance international public awareness through such public hearings and webcasts.
구체적으로 그러면 2월 17일 날 발표된 COI 보고서의 내용 중에서 가장 중요하다고 생각하는 부분들을 말씀드리도록 하겠습니다. 먼저 아까 말씀드렸듯이 인권 침해에 대해서 COI는 기본적으로 그 침해 사실이 존재한다고 인정을 했습니다. 다만 원래 제안되었던 9가지 유형을 6가지 유형으로 압축해서 발표한 게 다른 점이라면 다른 점이라고 할 수가 있겠습니다. 특징적인 점을 2가지 말씀드리면 첫 번째, 사회권의 대표적인 분야, 즉 시빌 앤 폴리티컬 라이트의 가장 대표적인 분야인 식량권과 자유권의 대표적인 분야,
rather economic and social rights. They talked about the right to food and also social rights, which is right to life, and these two were combined. And in addition,
방금 전에도 보셨듯이 인권 침해의 백화점이라고 할 수 있는 정치범 수용소를 자의적 구금이나 공과 관련해가지고 같이 묶어가지고 검토를 했다는 점이 달라진 점이라고 하겠습니다. 또한 가해자에 대해서도 나름대로 분석을 했는데 여러 기관들의 책임과 관련되는 고위 공직자들의 책임을 언급을 했지만 그 중에서도 가장 대표적인 기관으로 3가지를 지목을 했는데 조선노동당과 또 국방위원회 그리고 최고 지도자 수령 언급을 했습니다.
그리고 이러한 인권 침해 사실에 대한 확인
The next step,
다음 과정으로
after
자연스럽게
discussing
논리적으로
human rights
이러한 인권
violations,
침해 사안의
it
대부분의
was mentioned
상당
that
부분의
these
내용들이
violations were
인도에
crimes
관한
against
죄를
humanity,
구성한다 이렇게
and
결론을
in
내렸고
detail, the crimes against
구체적으로는
humanity
세
were
가지로
divided
분류를
into
해서
three.
설명을 했습니다. 첫 번째는 정치범
On
수용소 및 기타 구금
human
시설에서의
rights,
다양한 인권 침해 사안,
human rights
탈북자나
situations in the
종교적인
political prison camps,
박해를 얘기를 했고요.
and
두 번째가 좀 특이한
the
내용인데
second was about
90년대 중반 이후
starvation.
대량 아사 시절
And
고난의 대행
it was
대량
mentioned
아사
that
자체가
the
국가의 어떤 정책적인
starvation was because of the
형사적인 의도까지도
policies
인정이
of the
된다는
state.
판단하에 스타빙 파퓰레이션에
And
대해서
so, regarding the right to
식량권
food
관련되는
was
생명권 관련되는
also
행위들이
identified as one of the crimes against humanity. And the
세
third item
번째는
was related to
국제적인
victims
납치와
of
관련된
international
사안들이
abductions.
인도의 반환죄를 구성한다 결론을 내렸습니다.
One point that we need to
그런데 이제
think
여기서
about
좀
here is that
생각하실
it is
점은
not
기존에 이게 형사
a
재판 절차도 아니고 정식 재판
criminal
절차가 아니고 조사위원회이기 때문에 스탠다드
action
프루프라고
or
해서
some
입증의
kind of
입증의
judiciary
정도는
system.
기존의
Therefore,
형사
the
재판보다는 낮게 잡았습니다. 그래서
the
COI에서 말하기를 그거를
grounds of
reasonable
proof
grounds에
was to
근거로
be
해서
of
판단을 했다
reasonable,
이렇게 일단 얘기를 했습니다.
reasonable grounds.
이러한
And
결론
based on
하에
this,
몇
there
가지
were some
중요한
main
권고를
recommendations. Of
레코멘데이션을
course,
내렸습니다.
it was very
여러 가지가
broad
있고 아주
and
포괄적인데
many
그거는
items
우리
were
토론 시간에
recommended, but I
얘기될
would
것으로
like to
생각이 되고
here
저는
just
가장
point
핵심적인
out
것만
the
대표적으로
key points. The
말씀드리겠습니다.
first one
무엇보다도
was
첫
that
번째
for these
것은
crimes against
이러한
humanity,
반인도 범죄
that
행위에
they
대해서
should be referred
국제형사재판소에
to the
유엔 안보리를 통해서
International
회부할
Criminal
것을
Court
권고를 했습니다.
through the Security Council.
그리고
And
두 번째로는
second,
최근에
regarding the
대량 인권 침해 사태와 관련해서 강조되고
massive
있는
human rights
보호책임,
violations,
R2P
it was
관련돼서
recommended that
국제
it should
공동체의 R2P
be
책임을
applied
강조를
to the
했습니다.
R2P, the
기본적으로
responsibility to
1차적인
protect.
영토 국가인 북한의
That there was
책임
failure
이행이
from the state to
실패했다고 보고
protect its
국제 공동체에
citizens.
조금 더
Therefore, there should
적극적인
be
액션을 요구를 했는데 그래서
international
나온 구체적인
community
권고 내용은
response.
ICC
And
회부와
so that
가장
was
책임이 있는
identified
사람에
as
대한 타겟
referral to ICC
섹션을
and
권고를 했습니다.
targeted sanctions against most responsible.
이러한 내용의
And
대부분은 바로 저번 주
March
금요일 날
28,
3월 28일 날 제네바의 휴먼 라이츠
it was
카운슬 인권
adopted
이사회에서
during the Human Rights
채택된
Council
결의에
resolution. Most of the major
중요한 내용들은
recommendations
대부분이
were
포함이
adopted,
됐습니다.
but
포함이
there
됐고
was just
다만 달라진
minor
점은 과거 2년 동안은
changes,
without a
and it
vote
was that in the
컨센서스로
past it
반대
was
없이 관련
without a
결의가
vote,
채택이
but
됐었는데 이번에는
because
조금 더
for
공격적인 내용이 들어가서
this
그랬는지 정식
recommendation,
투표절차에
it had more
들어가서
aggressive
3년 전과 유사한
comments,
6표
and
정도의 반대표가
therefore
나왔다는
it
점이
was with the vote, and there were
직전
6
2년과는
that
다른
were
점입니다.
against and 34 the recommendation.
이러한
I
아주
talked about the
기본적인
main
계율을
points of
여러분한테 말씀을
the
드렸는데
recommendations
이러한
and the report.
내용을
And
바탕으로 저희가 아마 훌륭하신 패널 분들과 함께
I am sure
이
that our
보고서의 내용에
panels will
대해서
be
좀 더
able to
논의할 기회가
discuss
있을 것으로
further
생각이 되고
on this
또
report
앞으로
and
어떻게
also about the
조치들이
follow-up
진행될
actions
것인지,
and how the
국제
international
공동체는
society
여기서
should
어떻게 대응해야 되고
should respond,
우리나라는
and
또
how
북한의 인권
Korea
개선을 위해서 할 수 있는 일들이 구체적으로
can
무엇인지에
respond and
대해서
take
아주
initiative
내실 있고 활발한 토론이
against
있기를
this
기대합니다.
background. Thank you
이상으로
very much.
마치겠습니다. 감사합니다.
오늘 토론
The topic of
주제는
today's
유엔
debate
북한 인권조사위원회 활동을
is
통해
the
본
North Korean
북한의
situation
인권
in North
상황 및
Korea,
대응
UN
방안입니다.
COI activities and
잘
implications.
아시다시피
As you're well
올해는
aware,
북한
this
인권
year
문제에 있어서
will be
굉장히
recorded as a very
역사적으로
important
중요한
year in history
해로 기록이 될
related
것
to the human
같습니다.
rights situation in North Korea.
제가
First, because
외교관 생활을
this year
하면서
marks the 10th
유엔에서 두 번
anniversary of
근무할
the UN
때
activities
바로
related
북한
to
인권
the human
문제가
rights situation in North
유엔에서 관련해서
Korea.
상당히
And last
관심을
year,
받기
the
시작했는데
COI was
금년에
established,
조사위원회
and last
보고서가
February
굉장히
they have
포괄적인
announced
그런
their
내용의 북한
report.
인권 침해 실태에
Professor
대한
Cho has already
고발을 한
introduced the report to
그런
you in his
단계까지 발전한 것을
presentation.
보면은
The report
상당히
holds
좀
the
느린 감이
very
있지만
detailed
유엔 체제 내에서
explanations
상당히
of the situation in
착실하게
North Korea,
진전되어
as
온
well
것이
as
아닌가 이런
recommendations
생각을
for the
합니다.
international
그래서
society.
오늘
And so,
토의는
Mr.
크게
Magufule,
세 가지로
the High
나눠서
Commissioner for
진행을
Human
하려고
Rights,
합니다.
has mentioned
좀 더
that this is
효과적이고
indeed a
구조적으로
historical
토의를 하기
document.
위해서
And
첫
I'm
번째
sure that if
토의
you have read the
과제는
report, you will
북한
relate to what he
인권조사위원회
has
보고서의
said.
주요
Third,
내용과
within the South
권고
Korean
사항을
society,
살펴본
many
뒤에
people are becoming more and more interested in the unification between the two Koreas. And
두
so,
번째 토의
we
과제로서는
need to,
지난
at this
3월
point in time,
28일
think about the
제네바에서
human rights
채택된
situation in
인권
North
이사의
Korea
결의
and how
그리고
we will
앞으로
deal with the
있을
situation
유엔
in
총회와
relation to
안보리에서의
the
토의
unification.
전망을
And so,
포함해서
as the first
향후
topic for
북한
the
인권 문제에
IFANS
대한
debate, I do
국제사회의
believe that it's
대응이
very
어떻게 되나갈
meaningful that we are dealing with the
것인가에
human
초점을
rights situation in
맞추고
North Korea.
막으로
Throughout
세
my
번째
career
토의에
as a
있어서는
diplomat, I have served
이러한
at the
국제사회의
UN twice,
진전에 맞춰서
and it was just when the UN started to be interested in the human rights
어떤
situation in North
방식으로
Korea,
대응해 나가야 할
and the
것인가
UN COI
라는
report this
주제에
year
관해서
holds
검토를
great
해보자 합니다.
details of the human rights
그래서
situation in
우선
North
첫
Korea.
번째
And
주제를
it seems that although the
토론해보도록
pace is
하겠습니다.
quite slow, within the UN system, we see continuous interest and
첫
development
번째 주제는
concerning
역시
the human rights situation in North Korea, the Nazi of the 20th
북한 인권
century, and
조사위원회의
the Pol Pot
보고서 내용이
of Cambodia
되겠습니다만
is
사실
being considered to be similar to the North
인권
Korean
문제가
situation. And
왜 그렇게
to
중요한 것이냐,
announce
얼마나
this
심각한
report
것이냐
in
이런 데에
detail
대해서는 대충
concerning the human rights situation in North Korea
한국에서나 다
will
인식에 일치가
contribute
있습니다만
to raising
이번에
awareness within the
COI
international
보고서가
society. But having said that, compared to the
이를
interest of
정리했다는
the international
측면에서 상당히
society
의미가 있는 것
for the
같습니다.
human
그래서
rights situation in North
패널
Korea,
분들에게
it
우선
seems that
간략하게
we have not seen
COI
sufficient
보고서에 대한
interest and debate
평가를
within
좀
South Korea.
들어보도록
And
하겠습니다.
so,
우선 재성호 박사님.
Mr. Michael Kirby, who headed
COI
the UN
보고서에 대한
COI
말씀드리기
activities,
전에
has mentioned
유엔에서
that
북한 인권 문제에 대한
he
개입의
believes
수준이 어떻게
that there is
변화되어
not enough
왔는가에
interest
대해서
of
잠깐
the human rights
말씀드리면
situation in
사실
North
북한
Korea
인권
within
문제는
South Korea.
냉전
Of
시대에는
course,
사각지대였고
the human rights
또
situation in North
한국도
Korea
인권 문제에
is
대한 약점이
indeed an
있어서 뭐 인권 문제를
issue
제기할
that
수 있는 위치에
is
있지
leading
않았습니다.
to
그
the
당시에는
so-called
80년대,
South-South conflicts,
90년대에는
which means the
NGO,
conflict
특히
between
프리덤
the liberals
하우스라든가
and
엠네스티
conservatives.
인터내셔널이라든가
Because our
휴먼 라이츠
history
워치, 아시아
of
워치라고 있죠.
democratization
그런데
is
보고서를
short
내거나
compared
책자를
to
발간해서
Western
인권 문제 제기를
countries.
했고
It
유엔에서는
has not been
97년
long
8월에
that
유엔
the human
인권
rights
소위원회에서
issues have taken root within our
북한
society,
인권에 관한
and
결의를
it
처음
seems that
채택을
there are
했습니다. 그러면서 이제
political
문제 제기
implications of the
또는
human rights
비판,
issues
지적이
in South
시작이
Korea.
됐고
And so,
그리고
as we need to deal with
2003년
the
4년
human rights
유엔
situation in
인권위원회
North
현재
Korea within
휴먼
this
라이츠 카운슬의
framework,
전신인
we need to take a
인권위원회
deeper look into
커미션
how
휴먼
South
라이츠에서
Korea should deal with the situation,
북한
along
인권
with
결의를
how we should
채택을
prioritize
했습니다.
this
그러면서
issue
이때 하나의
in
변화는 뭐냐면
relation
2004년
to other
6월에
North Korean issues such
북한
as the
인권
North
특별
Korean nuclear
보고관을 유엔
issue. And
인권위원회에서
so,
임명을
today's
해서
debate
스페셜 라포트
will be
라포트에
divided
의해서
into
스페셜
three parts
리포팅을
in
하는
order
거죠.
to
매년.
have a
그러면서
systematic
인권에
debate.
대한 감시가
The first topic for
모니터링이
debate
유엔에서 이루어졌고
will be the main
2005년부터 유엔
contents of the
총회에서 매년
UN COI
지금까지
report as well as
작년까지
their
9차례에
recommendations.
걸쳐서
We will also
특정
take
국가,
a
국제사회가
deeper
지금
look into the
193개 유엔에 모이는데
implications through our
서너
debate. The
나라를
second
특정
topic
컨트리
is
스페시픽하게 해서
the
국별
documents that have
결의안을
been
채택을 해서
announced at the
인권을
March
침해를
28th
비난하는
Geneva
것뿐 아니라 강력히
Conference,
권고하고
as well
개선을
as the
촉구했다는 거죠.
response by the
그런데
international
이런 수준에
society
그치지 않고
concerning the
작년에
human rights situation in
인권인사회에서
North Korea.
처음으로 이제
The third
뭐냐면
topic for today's
북한의 인권
discussion
상황이라는 것이
will
비록
be
비무력 분쟁
the response of
상황이지만
South Korea in
이것에
relation
대해서
to the activities of the
안인도 범죄에
international
해당되는지
society.
크라임 어게인스트
So
휴머니티에 해당되는지
let us go
그리고
into the
법적
first
책임,
topic. So the
어카운터빌리티에
first
대한
topic,
그런 측면에 착안을
as I've
해서
mentioned
체계적인
already,
조사를
will
실시하라.
deal
무려
with
1년간의
the
기간을
UN
거쳐서
COI
하라고
report.
요청을
The
했던
North
것입니다. 그
Korean
결과가
human
COI
rights
보고서가
issue.
나왔는데
Why is
여기에
it so
대해서 한 가지
important
제가
and how
추가로
severe is
말해드리기로
it?
했지만
I think
지적하고 싶은
concerning those
것은
issues, We
그동안에
already have
유엔
a
안보리나
consensus within
인권이사회에서
South Korea and the
COI를
international
설치할 때는
community.
기간이
The
3개월,
recent
6개월밖에 지나지
COI
않았습니다.
report
예외적으로
has put all
시리아만
of that
지금
information
3년
into a
계속됐고
report. I think
올해만
that
연장되면
really is
4년까지
meaningful. And so
가지만
we would now
이
like to
비무력
turn to
분쟁
the
상황에서
panelists
북한 인권에
for
관해서
their
1년의 기간을
evaluations of
줬다는
the
것이죠.
COI
이거는
report.
뭐냐?
Professor
국제사회에서 지금
Before I
최악의
speak on the
수준이고
COI
이걸 더
report,
이상
I
방치할
would
수준이
like to
아니라
talk
문명사회의
about
수치고
how
반인륜적인
UN
범죄라고 하는 것을
SHIN
적어도 유엔에서
reviewing
지금
the
인식하고
human
결과가
rights
이번에 나온 것이다.
issue
그리고 이
in
결과는
North
이미 상당히
Korea.
많이
I
알려졌던
don't
것입니다.
think
그리고
UN in the
지난 1년
1980s
동안
and 90s
공청회라든가
could
탈북자라든가
intervene
증언을
in the
녹취를
human
하고
rights
자료를
situation
수집해서
in North Korea that
포괄적으로
much. It was mostly
제시했고
the
그
activities were
COI
mostly
보고서에서는
led by
결론, 사실
NGOs.
팩트
But
파인딩에
then in
대한 결론을 제시하고
1997,
어떤
a
레코멘데이션을
subgroup
아주
in the
잘
United
해놓고
Nations
있습니다. 그래서
first
앞으로
adopted a
국제사회의
resolution
후속
on the human
조치라든가
rights
북한 인권
issue in the
개선 방향은 이
DPRK.
COI
This
보고서에 나와
led
있고
to
이번
awareness
제25차 유엔
in
인권이사회에서는 바로 COI
UN,
보고서를
and then there
추인을
was
하고
the
그것에
Commissioner
대한
of
실효성을 좀
Human
높이기
Rights
위해서
in the
앞으로
UN
어떤
adopted
핵심적인
a
어떤 내용들을
resolution
담고
for
있다.
North
그렇게
Korean
이해하면
human
되겠고
rights issues. And
COI 보고서
the
채택으로
special
이제 북한 인권
rapporteur
문제는
was
마지막으로 이제 국제
designated
형사적 차원의
to give
문제로
a special report every
제기가
year.
등장하고 있다.
And this
이것이
was the
하나의
monitoring
스텝
activity of the
포워드다.
United
그렇게
Nations
말씀드리고
on
싶고,
North Korean human rights issues. And from
국제형사재판소의 제소는
2005,
실현 가능성은
for
시간이 걸리겠지만 상당한 의미 있는 진전이다.
years,
이렇게 말씀드리고
there have
싶습니다.
been
모두
resolutions for
고맙습니다.
special
예,
countries
감사합니다. 다음
to
질문 주시겠습니다.
make criticism and strong recommendations to make changes to human rights situations in particular countries. Then last year, ultimately, although the human rights situation in North Korea is not an armed conflict, still that there was a request to investigate if there were crimes against humanity and if this is something that should be referred to the International Criminal Court. This type of request was made, and that was what led to the COI report. I know that I started off very long-winded, and I would like to say that when the COI was established in the past, it would only be around 3 months or 6 months. The exception was Syria, which has an investigation going on for 3 to 4 years. But it shows that for North Korea, they had an investigation for 1 year. This shows that it's a very serious situation in the world situation, and at the UN, they are realizing that it is a grave situation, and this is something that was already well known, of course. And for 1 year, during the past year, there were a lot of open hearings, public hearings rather, and they heard from many of the North Korean defectors, interviews, and there were fact-finding activities, and the report talks about the methodologies, the facts, and recommendations. And so the human rights activities of the United Nations will be based on the COI report, and the COI report was adopted during the Human Rights Council meeting. And the COI report was adopted, and because of this, the human rights violations in North Korea now can be referred to international criminal justice mechanisms. Of course, it will take time for this to actually take place, but I think this is a great step forward. Thank you.
Well, the interest of the international society concerning the human rights situation in North Korea has been reflected by the UN COI report. Just like Director Shin has mentioned, it seems that within South Korea, the human rights situation in North Korea has become an issue for South-South conflicts, whereas there has been patient investigation by the international society, followed by actions to hold those who are responsible accountable. So why did the international society have a year-long activity through the organization of a COI, whereas there is not that much interest within South Korea? Well, I think we will continue to talk about this issue. Related to this, what I would like to mention is that the conflict related to the human rights situation in North Korea is very political. This is the same for the liberals and conservatives. The human rights situation in North Korea is an issue that both sides are considering and approaching for their own political interests. And so it really is not an approach based on pure interest for human rights and human dignity, but it's a political agenda within South Korea. And so that may be a reason why we have not been able to live up to the interests of the international society. The results of the COI report, I believe, is a very well-made document related to the human rights situation in North Korea. It mentions R2P as well as ICC. And I think we may have to add a balanced perspective. Of course, North Korea has the supreme leader and other people who will be held accountable in one point or at one point or another. But the DPRK is a country that exists, and they have their own sovereignty, and the year-long activities of the COI have been very active, but they have not been able to actually go inside North Korea, and they have been denied access to North Korea. But even if they did have access, they would not have been able to see the actual situations, and they have yet to see these situations, and so we need additional investigations. And I believe that whether we improve the relationship between the two Koreas or North Korea and the international society, we need to continue to help North Korea open its doors and come out of its shell so that we will be able to have an accurate investigation of the situation in North Korea. By having access to North Korea, that will be the only way that we can confirm the situation and hold people accountable if necessary. At the UN Human Rights Council, they adapted a resolution, and some of the content is very aggressive, but it also mentions the need for improving the relations between the two Koreas. And so we need to have a realistic approach for the situation and think about what those realistic approaches are.
Thank you. Professor Kim, you talked about human rights and also about you connected it with reunification. Professor Hong, what are your thoughts on this?
The result of the COI activities or the findings of the COI activities was the confirmation of crimes against humanity, as well as naming the leaders of North Korea as criminals. Some have mentioned that they have been surprised and shocked by these results, to the best of my knowledge. As someone who has been interested in this situation for a very long time, I believe that these results are very natural, and these results did not come out of the blue, but rather during the last 2 decades, the UN and the international society has been very patient about improvements in North Korea, but I think there is a collective frustration that has built up over that time concerning the lack of improvements and changes during the last 2 decades. Well, I have observed North Korea for a very long time, and we have seen quite a lot of changes in the world. For example, the collapse of the communist bloc that we thought would lead to changes within North Korea, but North Korea actually went deeper into its shell. We have also seen the Jasmine revolutions, and that has actually led North Korea to not open itself, but rather develop nuclear weapons. And they have actually deepened their totalitarianism. There has also been changes in China. They have become the largest trading nation in the world by opening and reforming themselves. But even amidst those changes, North Korea has become even a bigger hermit. And so there's a collective frustration within the international society concerning the lack of changes in North Korea. And we now have an understanding of how very unique the North Korean leadership is, and it is in essence a totalitarian society, and its existence is now equal to crimes against humanity. During the last 2 decades, the international society has tried to talk to North
20여
Korea,
년간
but now
제가
it has
보기엔
changed
20여
its
년간이
stance
아니라
to
더
punishing
긴
North Korea.
기간
Crimes
누적된
against
결과에
humanity
대한
have
이
been
국제사회
found
평가가
during World War II,
인도에
and
관한
that
이제
has actually been
고발하는
named as a
그런
feature of
결과가
North Korea.
됐다는 그런 평가가
There has
있었습니다.
also been
다음
starvation
우리
in North Korea,
이무슨
but North
연구원께서 좀
Korea has actually used that starvation as a tool to maintain their regime, which has led to crimes against humanity. This approach may seem extreme, but the existence of North Korea itself is extreme. Well, that is all for my opening remarks.
North Korea as a totalitarian regime inherently is maintaining its regime by violating human rights, and I think that such human rights violations have been going on for 2 decades and even more than that. And I think that the crimes against humanity designating North Korean human rights violations as a crimes against humanity is a result of this. First of all, I would like to thank you for inviting me here from the Korea Institute for National Unification, and from 1996 we have been monitoring North Korea, and we developed and made that political prisoner camp video to explain the situation of North Korea better. And I think that the international NGOs such as Human Rights Watch talked about and wanted to raise awareness on the human rights violations in North Korea, and in order to do so, they talked about bringing these crimes against humanity to a criminal court. North Korea is showing a very dangerous image to the international society, and because they are showing such an image, it was possible to come up with such a COI report. If North Korea had not tested missiles and also nuclear weapons, the COI might not have been established, and such an investigation might not have taken place. For 1 year, they carried out investigations, and they have a lot of understanding on human rights. But the officers did not have much understanding on North Korea, and I'm sure that they face many difficulties in making investigations, conducting investigations on North Korea. When they initially started their investigation, they did not know the situation of North Korea, so they were very surprised about the testimonies heard from the victims. But in the actual report, there was a very balanced view, and the COI held public hearings in various areas, and I think that holding public hearings initially was not appropriate. However, I think now that that was the only way that they could approach the situation, and international organizations that are conducting activities in North Korea, they could have worked with them, but it was not possible to do that. And so the North Korean defectors living in South Korea was the basis, made up a large portion of the documentation. And in addition to that, the interviews had to go through interpretation. And as you know, the human rights situation in North Korea really depends on the region and the timing, and I'm sure that it might have been difficult for the officers to understand the situation, but despite these limitations, I think the United Nations came up with a balanced view to review the human rights situation in North Korea, and I think in that sense it is meaningful. As you mentioned, Dr. Lee, there are of course some limitations to the COI report, because a major part of the inquiry is the field inquiry, but most of the human rights violators, such as North Korea, they don't want to raise awareness about human rights situations in their countries, and so they deny any such criticism, and they block the investigators from coming into their country. And the third thing that these perpetrators do is to prevent any access to their state. And so these countries normally show such a pattern. North Korea was the same. And regarding this, I want to ask a question to Dr. Lee. The COI report
그러한 접근을 취하고 있는데
some
이
radical or
이러한 접근
progressive remarks,
방식이
and it was a bit
아주 장기간
aggressive.
북한 인권
And
문제를
do you think
다뤄온
that this
분으로서
approach,
얼마나 북한
as a
인권
person who has
개선에
been
이러한
working
공세적인
on
접근
North
방식이
Korean human rights
실효적일
issues
것인가에
for a
관해서
long
좀
time, do you think
의견을
such an
말씀해
aggressive
주시면 도움이 될 것
approach
같습니다.
is realistic and practical?
인권 침해가
We
왜
have to
발생하는지
first think
침해
about
구조에
why
대해서
human rights violation is occurring, and there was a study on this within our organization. As you know, that there is a structural problem, which is the fundamental reason for human rights violation, and the COI is saying that human rights violations is occurring systematically and widespread, and that it is a grave situation. That is true to one part, but you also have to consider the famine that occurred since 1995, and this has led to further violations to human rights. This is something that we cannot disregard. We talked about the right to food. We don't know exactly how many people starved to death in North Korea, but we know that many people died due to starvation, and the North Korean central government, there are doubts on whether they knew the actual numbers of people who died due to starvation, and they provide food according to social class. We know that there was an overall lack of food during a short period of time. But is this something that we can, but was this due to the starvation, due to a particular regime mechanism? This we have to think about. And next I would like to hear from Professor Jung-hyun. The COI report is very comprehensive.
COI가 이제 보고서를 상당히 포괄적인 보고서를 채택했는데
Just
과거에
as
유사한
Dr. Che said,
아까 우리
in the past, COIs were established for an arms conflict area. If you compare with previous COIs,
어느 정도 이 보고서가
how intrusive is this report?
공격적, 인트루시브한지에 대해서 좀 말씀을 해주시면.
I don't know in detail the results of previous COI reports, but if you think about the Rwanda situation, there were ad hoc international criminal tribunals established, and the report was a detailed analysis, and such analysis was used to persuade the Security Council, and the COI report, of course, cannot be complete and perfect, but I think that the analysis was well conducted and that it is significant. To give you a short opinion on the COI report, the COI, I did not think that it would be established because when there were comments that Kim Jong-un should be referred to the ICC, many international legal experts said that this would not be possible. And so I thought the COI would not be established, but NGOs played a great role in establishing the COI. And I think that this is a good point for us to remember, learn from, is that although we may not think so, but the COI demonstrates that North Korean human rights issue is high on the international agenda, and the COI report, when they made inquiries, surveys, and there were questionnaires and interviews, and in the questionnaire there were many basic questions, so I thought, would they be able to really accumulate necessary documents within a year? But when I saw the report, it was very comprehensive, and so I was surprised by the comprehensive result. So I think that although we may think that the prospects are negative, they are not always like that.